She's been at Teladoc for 2 years, Donna Boyer, the Chief Product Officer, but really has a storied career in digital. She has been at companies like Airbnb, Stitch Fix, Callaway Digital Arts, and Yahoo for a number of years. Please welcome Donna Boyer.
Is this on? Yes? No? Okay, awesome, great. Going with veteran as old, not quite as good as legendary. We'll go with it. Hi, everyone. First of all, I'm so thrilled to be here. I've learned so much and have had a great time, and so I am really excited to share some of the sort of tips and tricks and learnings with you, but also continue to learn back. So we're gonna go through this presentation, but also roundtable later. So have time for questions here, and then I wanna make sure that we kind of get the conversation going as well, because there's a lot to talk about around this. So I think the first thing for me is, when we think about direct to patient, really thinking about patients as people. Right, that consumers, sometimes we talk about it as DTC, sometimes we talk about it as direct to patient, but really what we are doing, Teladoc, is reaching people on their phone, on their computer, the same way that they do kind of everything else from their couch, whether it's shopping or door dashing or being on TikTok. It's really changed. People's expectations have changed around how they access things, and so really making sure that more than anything else, we're not thinking about this as acquiring patients, but really reaching people. So that's really what I'm going to talk a little bit more about today. First, how did I get here? I'm kind of the opposite of Erica and having zero credibility around anything from a healthcare perspective. I think this is a picture of me and my son at 7 in the morning at Volcano Bay after arriving I live in San Francisco, took the flight to Orlando, got in, a little bit late, but we're like, we can wake up early, no problem with the time difference. We're going to be there for rope drop, and did all of the water slides within 15 minutes from 7 to 7 a.m. and then just slept on Volcano Bay Beach, right? And so that says a little bit about how I like to do things. I can be a little bit all or nothing. I too have ADHD, and it can be an advantage, right? In terms of just jumping in, being creative, trying new things, and figuring it out. My background is, veteran in digital. I've done this for a long time. I started way back when I worked at Harvard Business School in economics, and decided that was not for me, and drove cross country, followed a boy, and ended up in a startup that got acquired, and discovered that, and I started in marketing, discovered I loved it. I loved the data, I loved the analytics, and that led to the very early days of personalization. So I worked for early personalization companies, Webtrends, all of those kind of analytics world, led product at a little company called Personify. That led me to leading personalization globally at Yahoo way back in the day. And so I have just loved, since the old days, of using data to really engage people in different ways. And through the decades of doing this, kind of banned the word personalization, because personalization is just a technology, right? It's really about making it personal, and there's no more personal than health, right? And so, a lot of that is really taking that approach into, when we think about direct to consumer or patient, really trying to make it directly to people and to reach people where they are. So how did I make this shift? Aside, it's a little bit more deliberate than the water slide at 7 a.m., but just as, I think, just as sort of early in the days, and just as sort of like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it for real. So I live in San Francisco, and I've sort of have thought about through all of these years going into healthcare. Like way back in college, I went to school thinking I was going to be pre-med, and I didn't know that I had ADHD at the time, but I proposed to my advisor that I major in intro classes, and he was like, yeah, no, you're not going to major in intro classes, because the pre-med list was really long about a lot of things that I had to go really deep in, and I was at a liberal arts school, and so I ended up majoring in economics because I came into school with all my math done, and it was the least amount of coursework I could do in any one subject and still graduate. So I took a lot of computer science, a lot of classics, a lot of English. I did take a bunch of biology. I took Orgo. I loved it. But sort of that was that, right? But kind of fast forward, the thing that's wonderful about product and product management careers is that it's kind of like majoring in intro classes. You can shift topics with whatever sort of catches your, and so through this, I kept thinking I really want to be a doctor. I really want to be a doctor. And then I decided, I was too old when I was 23 to be a doctor and to go back to medical school. And then I got my EMT license. Again, like there's sort of an ADHD theme, adrenaline junkie bit there. So I did that, but then I kept going back to software. And it was June of the pandemic in San Francisco, and it was a really dark time. Like quite literally a really dark time. There were wildfires, the sky was orange, there were protests, and that little squirt was having really significant mental health issues. He had been seeing a therapist, and he was really not doing well. And his therapist suggested that we get him into a psychiatrist, and the wait list at UCSF was 18 months. And this was not an 18-month problem. And the therapist suggested, truck to the pediatrician, suggested that we try virtual. And, I thought, like, what, right? And then within 3 days, he got connected with a psychiatrist who was fabulous. And it really was very truly life-saving for him. And it really made me think, because, again, I was sort of like, ugh, I'm working 20 hours a day at Stitch Fix, great job, but I am sending people, what I'm thinking about is how do I change from work clothes and date night clothes that fit to athleisure that fits, right? And so it's like, this is not, I don't think this is what I'm meant to do at the moment, right? Great data, super interesting, really deep, interesting algorithm problems, but to what end? The questions about do we send people slippers or slipper shoes? Like, no. So I, it's like, okay, if I am ever going to get into healthcare, it's going to be now. Because the only thing I know how to do at this point is to make products. I really can't cook. There's a lot of things that are on the someone else needs to do that. My husband puts up with me, but I can make products. And so I just was looking at all of the health equity issues, the disparity, the access challenges, and thought, okay, I'm going to do this. So really did a whole survey of getting into healthcare, where do I want to be? And I ended up at Teladoc because I wanted to learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible, about all of the pieces of healthcare. Sort of, again, going down that water slide, like a 7 a.m. thing. So that was sort of what brought me here. Very much an outsider, right? And so it's a lot of questions in my first couple of months. My first 4 months were questions like, is that acronym a Teladoc acronym, or is that a healthcare acronym? And what does it stand for, and what does it mean? And these are pretty basic acronyms, right? So I've gotten better at that. But I started doing platforms there, and I got promoted after 5 months into the chief product officer role. So now my learning, I just get to see everything from robots to mental health and everything in between. And so what I want to talk about today is really what that means as we think about not about disrupting healthcare, which is really what people think about when you think about virtual and new ways of doing things, but how do we leverage everything that we have to think about how do we truly empower people to live their healthiest lives, rethinking from a people perspective, a consumer perspective, what this means. There are things that, as very much an outsider, looking, and I lead, as Chief Product Officer, I lead product management, product marketing, content design, and some other assorted pieces of it across everything. And so in all these design reviews, questions like, when we say visit, real people don't say visit, they say appointment. Like, what is a visit, right? It's sort of at Stitch Fix, I didn't know anything about fashion whatsoever. And there was a whole big trend around distressed denim, right? Distressed denim just means jeans with holes in it, right? But like real people don't say distressed denim. It's just like you've got ripped jeans. Like, your mom was like, are you gonna really go out with those ripped jeans? That's distressed denim. Similarly, there's a lot of healthcare lingo that you just don't think about in the way that real people think about things. Like, you make an appointment with a doctor. It's not like you're not requesting a visit. And so there's just little tiny things that make healthcare intimidating to people. We've done a bunch of user research, and what was so fascinating to me is that people across demographics will do things wellness related, whether it's about, mindfulness is increasingly, surprisingly, becoming top of mind for people, and really things about, looking at their steps on Fitbit, or things that people will do that are really wellness related. But when they think about healthcare, it's a huge divide. It's not a continuum, it's a chasm. Right? It's really about, I'm doing these things at home, and then I'm entering into the healthcare system. So I started really thinking about, okay, if we are going to be empowering people to live their healthiest lives, how do we bridge that connection? How do we take advantage of the fact that we know that people are doing things on their couch in front of the TV? We know that people are doing things like, checking, my battery's dead, but checking the steps. And how do we actually leverage that in a more seamless way to lower the intimidation factor in order to do that? And one of the things that became really clear to me is that we can't do that in our products unless we actually think about how we bridge those divides internally. And so it's not that dissimilar to some of the Genentech examples, right, where it really became important that we think about, there were some slides that were like, product or like kind of some gimmicks on the website, and then services were our consults or things, or hardware was a product. And really, how do we think about this really differently? Is like our product, if I think about consumer, Uber's product is not the app, the product is the ride, right? And so how do we actually have a different mindset where we're really thinking every day about this whole continuum, from the website to the very first contact that you have with marketing, to the app, to the experience that you have with a doctor, to what happens afterwards in your care plan, to what happens not through us, but when you have to go get that lab or you have to go get that prescription. How do we think about all of that as part of what we need to enable to empower people to live their healthiest lives? So really have focused quite a bit around not thinking about marketing as marketing, right, as a separate thing that we do, in a department over here from product, but it's really just part of that overall journey, and it's part of how we can meet people where they are in order to empower them way before and way after they're actually engaging with, what would be historically considered our product. So a little bit more about that. So Teladoc the company is 20 years old and started sort of back in the very early days of virtual care, where people thought it was just, like, no way is this ever going to be a thing. Like, there's no way that, first of all, video was like, what, right? So, there were lots of technical challenges. There were lots of issues with that. And then fast forward with the pandemic, it turns out it's really convenient. and helpful to be able to talk to a doctor in your pajamas when you are not feeling well and you don't want to drag yourself through the snow to find out what's going on. So that's a little bit here to stay. But Teladoc, kind of over the 20 years, had acquired lots of pieces of care. So everything from, it's really well known for urgent care. That's really our initial sort of bread and butter, was 24/7, call a doctor, and you would often see this. Our clients were big, big health plans as a sort of an adjunct to a nurse line. I first discovered Teladoc where it was, that letter that you sometimes get in the mail that sometimes you open that's like, hey, there's a new service. It just happened to come at a time that I had a sinus infection, and so it was very convenient. But, that was really marketing historically, is that you would get a direct mail piece from an insurance company with like a joint logo, and that was. Over the years, many, many more pieces of this. Everything from enabling health systems with things like support, like NICU support or strokes, and robots in, hospitals ranging from Cleveland Clinic to just amazing, amazing hospitals, Northwell, to all the way to mental health, to our chronic condition management. The challenge with that was that there were pieces of it, and there are many, many different conditions, but they were conditions, right? Like there was this individual, it's sort of like going into that big medical office building and taking the elevator to this floor versus that floor, but those offices didn't know anything about each other. So a really important thing, and what I've been very focused on for my 2 years here, is really integration. Like, how do we integrate? How do we actually make sure that we are not treating people as conditions in a collection of conditions, but we're really looking at thinking about people as people? And we just launched a new, if I can get this to work, oh, that was magic. It never works. Nice job.
Every part of you is connected.
A new ad campaign.
Your hip bone's connected to your backbone.
Top to bottom, front to back, inside and out.
Your arm bone's connected to your hand bone.
So the way you care for your health should be too. That's why we're here.
Well, them bones, they're gonna walk around. I said, well, them bones.
Teladoc Health provides connected care. Whether you need to talk to a doctor, or need mental health support, or care for chronic conditions, Teladoc Health brings it all together to not just treat parts of you, but to keep all of you healthy, so you can live healthier ever after. Get started today at teladochealth.com.
So the theme behind that is connected, right? That it's really about whole person. Whole person is, just shows up in every, it's like website everywhere, right? But really, what does that mean? And what it means for us is that it really is this opportunity to put everything into one place, but more importantly, for us to think internally about the connections between things. And I think that's the biggest change, right? Unless we are operating, as a single, seamless connection across from everything from the marketing teams to our clinical teams, we're not going to be connected. I say often to my teams, like, we're shipping our org, right? Like, this page looks like we're shipping our org. Like, because your org design shows up in your product experience if you're not ruthlessly customer focused about it. So, in that ad, there's pictures of this app that we just launched, and that was really, really hard. We had to take our, things like there's the data, but there's everything when you're thinking about how to make things connected to your account preferences from this company, or your password settings from that company don't match, right? Or, how do you actually take all of these different things and squish them into a single app in a information architecture, in design that makes sense for what people need to do? So there's a lot of personalization technology underlying that, and there's also just a lot of brute force thinking. Like, so many meetings around, is it like this or is it like that, around the smallest details. But the important thing behind that is those meetings didn't happen in silos. Those meetings happened really bringing together people from across, everything from our member support to our clinical operations team to the user research teams on my team, to really make sure that we have this very integrated virtual care approach. And so I would say that the biggest lesson for me in doing this, and the most important thing, is that when we're thinking about how do we actually reach patients, how do we reach people, the first thing to look at is internally. How are we actually operating in a way that is more people-centric instead of department-centric? And that's one of the biggest, I think the biggest takeaways, and also perhaps one of the biggest changes to lead, is how do we actually, it's not department. Product isn't the website, product is what we offer, and it's a synthesis of everything. And so, that it really resonated, Erica, what you had said earlier about like overcoming the boundaries, right? So I have a disdain for races. It's just like you could just spend so long talking about who's accountable and who's responsible, and then you can also spend so long arguing about what's the difference between responsible and accountable. When you have people working cross-functionally together, it's sort of, I think the example I like to use is it's sort of like professional neurodiversity. So we have a lot of my immediate family. We've got all sorts of stuff, right? We're so good at escape rooms. Like we can get out of any escape room, right? Like you could just get like all of our differences together, and no question, right? And so I think about this cross-functional product development really similarly. Like if you can work across boundaries to really engage people differently, to think a little bit differently, and to really question from a beginner's mindset, I know it's always been done that way, how else might we do this? If you really think about how else can we connect all things together, I think that is really, when you think about the best consumer companies, it's not that people are fundamentally reinventing, it's small differences, right? It's small things that make all of the difference, and those small things come from really understanding the customer problem. So really understanding the emotional, like what is the emotional need, what is the little bit of friction that you can remove to get people to take that next step. I can give you an example from Airbnb. At Airbnb, I led the host side of the platform. And one of the things about hosting, there were companies like VRBO before Airbnb, right? And this was before I got there. But one of the things that was really interesting is that Airbnb started in cities, and when expanded into some of the more traditional vacation rental markets, one of the reasons that it took off was because if you ever did anything kind of way back in the day through VRBO, there was a lot of like payment things going back and forth. You had to send checks. You had to, there was a contract. And on Airbnb, it was just part of the platform, right? Like you just paid. So that is an example. It isn't really about the vacation rental itself. It's about the things around getting to the vacation rental that matter. So I think, thinking about it from that perspective, it's not just, the actual experience. It's like, what is the whole circle around the experience that makes it hard for people. And if you can lower those barriers and you can do things in ways that are, just a little bit easier, what does that mean in terms of being able to achieve the health outcomes that we are all here to deliver? So I won't go into all of the different pieces that we had to put together in order to do this. And I think this is from our corporate overview, and it is true. We deliver comprehensive integrated virtual care that spans all of this. And in order to do that, we had to put all the pieces together, and putting all those pieces together in a way that is person-centric, member-centric is, I think, the biggest part of how you humanize that connection. It's not, it's easy to think about like multiple brands or multiple technologies. And if you do this right and you do this well, all of that recedes into the background, and being super person-centric and how you go after that. I think that's kind of the key message, is every meeting, every time, is recentering and refocusing on, okay, let's look at this through a regular person's eyes. Like, how would they say this? How would they think about this? Because it's those little frictions that make the difference. We had to really squish it all in, right? And so we put it all into the app. There's lots of things from how do we actually, what is the difference between how you engage with a primary care doctor and 24/7 care? Like, how do you think about that? We had to, people don't really understand what primary care is, right? 60% of people who have used our primary care service haven't seen a primary care doctor in over 2 years. And it's largely because they don't think about it the way that that primary care doctors think about it. They think about it as, oh, I have a sinus infection, right? I should go see a doctor. But it's a really, really different mindset. So it's little details like that we had to pay attention to. Your visit is confirmed. Especially when you're doing virtual, is visit confusing? What does that mean? Who's visiting whom, right? So it's all of these little questions, too, that, we're constantly thinking about every day because those details matter. The other thing that really matters is, personalized experiences across the different touch points. So we have an amazing data science team. We've got so many interactions and so much data that we can, what really matters to people? How do we actually work across the aisle to think about that touch point not as something that marketing has separately, but it's seamlessly, thinking about it as the experience. You might receive a notification, a push notification from the app, and an email, and something in the mail the same day. How do we take, and you might see an ad on Facebook, and you might see that commercial on TV or whatever. How do we actually think about every single step in the journey as an opportunity to meet people where they are? How do we leverage the data that we have available? How do we leverage clinical best practices? How do we actually think about ways to just nudge people through that journey in a way that takes into consideration where they are, best practices in behavioral design, behavioral science, to take people to take that next step. And I think, if anything, that's really the way to look at it from a DTC perspective, is it's just one next step. One next step, and how do we actually leverage everything we can to do that? And the next step is different for everyone. And so really trying to understand and to take advantage of and how to reach people with what's right for them at that next moment, one step at a time. It's sort of, there's so much that's gone into behavioral design around things like, I don't know, we were talking last night at dinner about, binge watching things on Netflix, right? So much has gone into, exactly how long do you make people wait for that next episode? What is too short, but what is if someone gets up to get a drink, they might not come back. They might realize that they've been, on the couch for so long. So it was sort of too much, but so much work has gone into that, and that's the way consumer companies think about things. It's not always for good, right? It's not necessarily good that you just watch the whole season once, right? It's not necessarily good that you've been on TikTok up to the point where they start sending you those reminders, hey, you might want to get up, right? But you can use those same techniques for good when you're thinking about how can you get people to, follow up on that next visit? How can you use it to maybe have that annual visit instead of just showing up when you have a sinus infection? How do you reach people where they are is a really holistic circle of the product, the clinical pieces, the marketing pieces. And so not thinking about it as a department, not thinking about it as a function, but thinking about it as how can we bring all of the knowledge that we have within our own, what used to be four walls, right? Which is now all over the place, to bear, to bring those experiences to play in a way that reaches people in the way that they think about the problem, not the way we think about the problem. I think the biggest thing behind this, and what I want to leave everyone with, is in order to do that, it's not a racy. There's no amount of org design. Org design is important. Clarity of who is doing what by when is super important. But I would say the biggest thing that helped lead this change was shared values, and really thinking about okay, there's going to be those moments where people are like, wait, that was my job, or, you're stepping on toes, or, this is my area of expertise, or I get this one, like, you're not a doctor. Like, right, I definitely not. My mom does call me often, and, she'll say, like, well, I have this thing going on. Like, no, like, you can use Teladoc, but, like, don't ask me, right? It's not good. But, I think the important thing is really being guided by a shared purpose and shared values, and rather than thinking about who owns what and who brings what to the table, really, again, coming back to, like, what is it that we're trying to do, and how do we leverage from all of the information that we have to make a decision, a synthesized, unified decision. Doing that has made a huge difference. Instead of thinking about, okay, this is the marketing team, this is the product team, that's what's made the difference. All of the things that we've done, recently that I would consider like really big wins in terms of conversion or retention, I would say 90-something% of them have come from discovering something that's in the gap, right? So sent out an email, doesn't deep link into the app, right? So people are in this like endless password thing. And the reason for that, different teams, different departments. So the more that you can think about it, about shared outcome, shared purpose, shared team, that's really the way, more than any other, technique or tip or trick or best practice or tool. That's been the success about really meeting people in terms of that DTC connection, is really thinking about it person first, and then thinking about how do you use all of the channels, all of the touch points you have to deliver that message in a way that matters to them. Because if it matters to them, it turns around and matters, to the outcomes, and matters to the business as well. So it's really, again, like, it's not, I think it can feel different, right? I think all that DTC really is just returning to what everyone has talked about today, which is like really delivering the thing that we're all out here, regardless of everyone's individual mission statements, we're all out here to make people's lives better and to make them be more empowered to live their healthiest lives. And doing that in a way that's really about letting the technology dissolve behind it, fade into the background, and letting the org boundaries fade into the background. It's hard, right? But being unified by purpose is, I think, the secret tip to make that happen. And so happy to take questions about the specifics behind it, but I think that's almost like the most important thing as well, is to be people-centric and people first within your own org as well.
Thank you, Donna. We have, Donna is going to lead roundtable on D2C models shortly, but if we have any questions now. There you go.
I have a very quick question. I'm just curious, Margie from Cargo. I know you said you love data, and so do we. Curious what people are searching for the most when they're looking for a doctor. Are they prioritizing insurance, how local they are to that doctor, their specialty? What are you seeing as that priority?
There's two things. So if it's I think if it's a condition, right? So if people have just been recently diagnosed, prediabetes is a big one, they will come to us through that. There's a lot of Googling that will happen around that. There is most of it is like the stuff that people will come in for the most is more urgent care. It's like see a doctor now, or closest doctors to me, or doctor availability, or urgent care. Those are the things that are sort of the initial thing. So what I would say is that despite things being virtual or online, they are very much local, right? So the mindset of people is not virtual versus physical. It is, I need a thing now, which I think is really consistent with where I started, is that, the technology is not how people think about things. Like, the technology is a given, right? If you are requesting an Uber, it's like you just need a car. You're not like, I'm just going to do this thing, right? And so it's still very much local. I would say the biggest thing, too, is time-based. And so people tend to think in terms of time. Like, get this to me fastest is probably the biggest incentive are the biggest driver of searches.
Donna, how are you identifying friction points? Are you doing it through patient panels? Are you doing it, do you have regimens internally to actually identify those small pieces?
Yep. So this is where I think, a background and just sort of consumer goes a very long way in terms of thinking about like funnel analytics through that. But the difference is that the friction points tend to be bigger, right? So when you're optimizing a conversion funnel, like if you're doing like rapid A/B tests and doing like small tweaks, what we found is that the friction points are actually much more, it's less about sort of what you would find in e-commerce and much more around people's concerns with the healthcare system. And so we can see drop-off points, so we do have everything instrumented and we can see drop-off points through the funnel. What's behind those drop-off points, though, I have found, and my team has found that, A/B testing, like is it this design or is it this, has not actually had as much impact as doing some user research around how are people perceiving this. People are really concerned, there's a very significant lack of trust factor, so people are really concerned about transparency of pricing, quality of care, things like confidentiality. And so what we found is that you can use data to look at the what. Like, okay, people are dropping off here as a what. The why has gone back to just doing some user research and to really try to get to the what is behind this. And it's been different than what I would have expected.
So how are you doing it? Do you have a permanent panel? Are you using third-party research? How are you actually getting that sentiment analysis?
Yeah, so we do. We have a set panel. We have, we will go to like the same sort of people all the time. We'll spin up different focus groups pretty quickly. There are some opportunities to leverage some things that I'm learning about here. So like new tools to do it more scalably. I would say the hardest thing is that have not been used to is the compliance aspects of it, right? And so really just making sure that we are rapidly testing things. Sometimes we'll just use something as simple as usertesting.com and just go out to that panel and just ask for people's perceptions of how might they view this? What would keep them from moving forward? And so that's been really good as well. It's both, I would say sometimes we want to go really deep, but often it's just a quick, 1 week turnaround of multiple designs getting tested to understand what the things that we're not really seeing.
And I have to cap it with a classic Media Post question about media and customer acquisition. What are the three major channels of customer acquisition for Teladoc Health, and has that changed during during and after the pandemic?
It's completely changed. It's a great question. I would say probably our initial channel, if we were to go back, and this has led to a really big change in how we need to think about things, has been through our clients, right? So through our customer, whether that's an employer or whether it's a health plan, their marketing was how we originally thought about it, right? And so we would, and we still do quite a bit, we will always do a lot in conjunction with, for example, like our employers, right? But but what's really shifted is the DTC piece of it, right? So that people know Teladoc, or they might have known Teladoc through Aetna or through Home Depot before, right? But then you start doing TV spots and you have much more of a brand awareness. Facebook has actually been really like a big channel for us recently. Podcasts have been a big channel for us recently, just like the brand awareness, which creates some really interesting opportunities because now people, and challenges, because people are coming to Teladoc both with insurance and without insurance, or with coverage or without coverage. So it is this blend. But when people are coming with insurance, their insurance might change over time, right? So we need to make sure that we're thinking about it not just from the way we had historically done it is, okay, they are an Aetna member, for example. Well, now they're a Teladoc patient, right? And so what does it mean when someone might change insurance over time? So that has led to channels like TV, like out of home, like Facebook as being really important for us in terms of both like direct and brand awareness.
Donna, thank you so much. That was great. And we're going to do a roundtable on this in about 20 minutes.